in New Hampshire.
Good.
So those are the big things. And then I'll probably ask you a couple other questions.
Okay.
Nothing too long, nice and short and sweet.
All right.
Okay?
Go.
You ready, Bob?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Governor Huckabee, thank you so much for
Thank you.
meeting with myself and Michelle Lavelle. Part of the reason we wanted to meet with you is to first get your thought on the Second Amendment and then on Common Core, but why don't we start with your thoughts on the Second Amendment and gun control legislation and gun laws across the country?
Well, where I come from, when you talk about gun control, that means you can handle the firearm so that you hit the target. That's gun control. I grew up in rural America, South Arkansas. My first BB gun I got when I was 5. I got a pellet gun at 7, a 22 at 9, a Springfield single shot. My first BB gun was a Daisy 25. I still have all these guns, by the way, every one.
Wow.
That Daisy is a classic now, and it's in, pristine condition. Got a 20 gauge shotgun when I was 10.
Oh.
So I've grown up, with sort of the graduation of different firearms as I grew up. When I hear people say, well, I'm for the Second Amendment, I believe in hunting, I cringe. Because the Second Amendment is not about hunting. I'm a hunter. I turkey hunt, deer hunt, duck hunt, antelope hunt. Look, I love to hunt, but this is not about hunting. This is about freedom. And I've heard people say, Huckabee is one of those gun nuts. But for where I come from, a gun nut is a person who is irrationally afraid of a firearm because they don't understand the nature of having one and the importance to their liberty. I don't love guns, but I do love freedom. I love it a lot. And the only way that we ultimately protect our freedom, whether it's the individual freedom in our own homes or the freedom that we have as an American nation, is that if we are able to outgun whoever wants to take that away from me. Somebody breaks into my house in the middle of the night, want to take away what would be my life, that's my freedom. And they're going to have to understand there will be a gunfight involved in that. And I plan to win. And so for those who say, well, that's what the cops are there for. When seconds count, the cops are just a few minutes away. Mm-hmm. And then you're dead. So I'm like a lot of people who believe that the Second Amendment is to say, yes, I will still call 911, but it's not going to be to call and helplessly wait as a victim while someone ravages my family or my home. I call 911 to tell them where to come pick up the body of the son of gun who broke in my house in the middle of the night. Mm-hmm. I have no apologies for that. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's cruel. I don't think that's wrong. I think it's cruel that somebody would believe that they have a right to take the lives of my family members or my property, and that somehow they can do that and get away with it, and not if I can help it. But the bigger picture is the Second Amendment was not even about just protecting. It is about protecting one's home, one's own castle. But it's bigger than that. It's protecting our country. It's giving ourselves the one last defense against tyranny. People forget that the Second Amendment was written in the context of the American Revolution, where the Founding Fathers overthrew their own government. As frightening as that sounds to some people today, they need to stop and ask, how did we get this great country? We got it when people decided that tyranny and their loss of liberty was so precious to them that they were willing to risk their very lives, their fortunes and their sacred honor in order to be free. That's how it came. Anything without understanding that, to me, makes a mockery of the Second Amendment.
Mm-hmm. Good. Excellent, thank you.
What are your thoughts on constitutional carry? That's been a growing issue, not just in New Hampshire, but in many states. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there is a constitutional right to carry. Sort of like, do you have a constitutional right of free speech or worship or assembly? Mm-hmm. Of course we do, and no one disputes that. When we get to the Second Amendment, there's almost an acquiescence on the part of many people to say, well, I'll handle some regulation. We have it. Most of us have it at our state level. We have it somewhat at the federal level. We have it pretty severely, I guess, if you look at the ability to own certain types of firearms, fully automatic. I guess it's not the most pressing issue in the world because I wouldn't want to do anything whatsoever to add a new gun law. I'm opposed to any. But I do believe that deep down, if we ever had a court that honestly looked at the Second Amendment, they'd probably come to the conclusion that constitutional carry is a valid understanding of that right. And that the government would have to prove that we are unsafe rather than that we have to prove that we are competent. I understand what a big debate that would be. But in the purest sense of the word, I don't have to prove that I'm a responsible speaker and get a license to speak. I don't have to prove that I'm a responsible worshiper and get a license to go to church.
Right.
And I don't know that any of the media have to prove that they're responsible to get a license to publish. If they did, there would be very little media going on. It would pretty the airwaves would be empty. And the New York Times would be just, 107 pages, a blank page.
Yeah, that's true. So that's good. Now, Michelle, do you want to ask about Common Core?
You okay switching to that now? Okay, a couple questions
Sure.
for you. I've noticed that you, at one point when it originated, its
Yeah.
inception, its concept was something that you did support.
Yes.
Where it was the improvement of standards for English language arts and math. But how it's developed over the years, that's something that you have since said you don't support. Can you clarify that?
Absolutely. Common Core was an outgrowth of something that was started back in the mid to late 90s called Achieve. And it was created and conceived by conservative Republican governors in order to keep standards high and to keep from the dumbing down of schools, which has been really one of the greatest educational tragedies of all time. The idea was this needs to be state control, local control, not federal. Mm-hmm. And this was going to be that there would be voluntary compliance among states who would still set their own standards. Mm-hmm. Eventually, what became what I would call a standards movement moved into the term Common Core. The origin of it was state control. Keep the feds out. 2 subjects only, language arts, math. That was it. Nothing in curriculum. Not one iota of what the curriculum should be. It was simply to determine what the standards were. In other words, what are the benchmark standards that a person should have at each grade level, and those would be set by the state. The idea was to create not federal standards, but national standards controlled by the state, so that if you had a kid who lived in New Hampshire and then you moved to the West Coast and you moved to Oregon, your 4th grader would have a reasonable expectation that what was expected of him or her in the 4th grade in math and language arts would be comparable to what would be expected in Oregon. So you wouldn't have a child moving that would be 3 years ahead or 2 years behind, whatever. Mm-hmm. The problem was that Common Core then became almost like the pack horse to start adding a bunch of stuff that had nothing to do with standards in 2 areas. First, it was curriculum. People started building curriculum into their Common Core standards, not only with the standards, but how to do it. The problem with that is, like, I've often used this illustration, and many things I've said about it in the past, where the true form of Common Core was like saying we're going to have standards for basketball. We know that the rim will be 10 feet from the floor to the rim, and it'll be consistent, so that if you play basketball in a big coliseum or in a tiny high school gymnasium, the floor dimensions are the same. It's the same distance from the top of the key to the goal, and it's 10 feet from there. And that way, if you can say, I can slam dunk the ball, that means you really have met a standard of slam dunking the ball. If you lower the goal to 6 feet, you can say, everybody on my team can slam dunk the ball. Does that really mean they're great basketball players? Mm-hmm. No, it meant that you changed the standard to meet the performance rather than to push the performance to meet the standard. That's an important part, because I think it's very critical that as we condemn, and rightfully so, condemn what Common Core has become, that we're careful that we don't sound like that we are against standards, that we are okay with dumbing down the standards that we expect of education. Because the only way we're going to create school choice, competition, charter schools, is to show that the government schools are failing. Because if they're failing a standard, then you can objectively say, then let's get rid of this school. Let's give parents choice. Let's give them empowerment to get their kids to a school that works. Common Core failed in several areas. The first was curriculum. The second was they started building in things like data collection, which had nothing to do whatsoever. And I'm not talking about collecting the scores to see longitudinally how students were performing over a period. That's legitimate, just to know, is there a pattern here? But this was longitudinal data collection on the individual students.
Yes.
That's out of bounds. And then the third thing was the federal government got involved and started creating this carrot and stick with Race to the Top funds, bribing states that they would give them more money if they did certain things the federal way, and that's when it went completely off the rails. And so, as I've said to people, it's toxic, it's got to be put to death, it's over, but at the same time, please don't give up on standards, but force them at the local level, keep them at the local level. That's where they should be.
So how would you envision putting an end to that at the federal level? Because there is this huge push from the federal, as you said, with the Race to the Top funds, or even the application binds states to those commitments that they make. There's that threat of federal funding being cut if you don't push, if you don't meet those things. And frankly, even individual families are being told that if they don't allow their student to participate in the test, they risk their school failing and risk federal funds. So how would you envision putting an end to it? How would you stop it?
There is no federal role in education. There's none. There's not one constitutional bit of authority for the federal government to have a role in how schools are run at the local level. It's a state function. Depending on how the state constitution is written, and every state has their own standards and constitution of who is responsible for education. Is it the local school board? Is it the state? In Arkansas, where I was governor, under the Constitution, the state had the ultimate responsibility. But we delegated that responsibility to local school boards unless they failed, either academically or financially, and then we had the power to take them over, which in a few cases, I was the first governor in history that went in and shut down a school district, fired the school board, fired the superintendent, and brought in a group of people to manage it so that we could at least give the kids a fighting chance. So the first thing, why do we have a federal Department of Education? We really don't need one. We shouldn't have one. And if we can't get rid of it, then at least change the function to do no more than be a center of best practices, that it would be a clearinghouse of ideas that states are utilizing to improve test scores in whatever area or to assist in curriculum development. But in no way should it have the authority or the power to start channeling extra funds, because then whoever funds it forces it. And force is a powerful thing. Force shouldn't come from the federal government when it comes to education.
Excellent. How do you see school choice and Common Core as either working together, or do you see them as being polar opposite? How do you see those? Because you do support homeschooling, you support charter schools. So how do you see Common Core fitting into that mix, or
well, I think it doesn't fit in because Common Core, as it is now, needs to disappear. I mean, it just needs to disappear. So there's no place in my world for the Common Core nightmare that has been become. Why would we impose something that we think is no longer valid for public schools? Why would we impose it on anyone? Right. And you mentioned homeschooling. When I was governor, I was one of the pioneer governors of really pushing for homeschool legislation that empowered those parents to make their own decisions. I was the first governor in all of American history that ever appointed a homeschool parent to the State Board of Education. My first appointment to the state board was a homeschool mom, my very first one. Do I need to tell you how well that went over with the education establishment?
Do you want to run for governor in New Hampshire?
Let me tell you, they were livid. They were absolutely livid. Now, she turned out to be one of the best board members they ever had and was terrific. But they hated her so much that when she would go to a legislative committee meeting, they would sit by her and look over her shoulder to see what notes she was taking. So she has had a Spanish minor and very fluent in Spanish, and she would sit and take all of her notes in Spanish so they wouldn't be able to know what she was writing.
Wow.
It was priceless. Wow. But she was tough as nails and had to be. And I knew, I'd known her since college, so I knew, what a tough cookie she was. And I understood. And I told her when she went in, I said, you're going in to the lion's den. They're going to hate you, because they already hate me. And anybody I appoint, they're going to hate. But because you're a homeschool mom, they will especially hate you. But, as it turned out, every year I had a new appointment. And so 7 years in, I had a total appointment. In 4 years, then I had a majority. And you know, that's part of governing. You have to systematically weed out that which is the problem and
Right.
take it over.
No, exactly.
Excellent. Thank you, that's all I have.
I have just a couple more quick ones.
Oh, sure.
So what made you decide to possibly think about jumping in the race
Yeah.
again?
For me, a lot of it is I see a lack of experience governing. There are a lot of good people that are going to run for president. Many of them are friends of mine, and many believe the same things I believe. I think if you looked at all the people who are talking about running for president, you'd be hard-pressed to find great variations doctrinally among any of us.
Right.
I mean, we're all going to say, yeah, we're for the Second Amendment, yeah, we're for fewer taxes. You know, we sound like parrots. The question is, if you're going to get on an airplane and the weather is really bad ahead and you anticipate flying through a thunderstorm, when you look up in the cockpit and see the guy in the left seat, do you want someone who's flown through 100 thunderstorms before, or the guy that just got out of flight school and he just got rated in this aircraft? You tell me. If America is in the trouble that it's in, and I think it's in real trouble, I believe we need someone who has governed, who has actually been the chief executive and managed and governed and been in that seat, and then been in a seat where over a long period of time that person faced real crises and governed against the wind. People don't know this for the most part, but when I became governor, actually when I became lieutenant governor in 1993, I was only the fourth Republican elected to a statewide office in 150 years. They were so unhappy about my election because every election I ever ran was against the Clinton machine, the Clinton money, the Clinton apparatus, and most every election,
Right,
Bill
Arkansas.
and Hillary came back and personally ran our campaign for my every opponent. So when people talk about how are we going to defeat Hillary, I'm thinking, hello, I'm the one guy who has
Wow.
fought their machine, their money, their apparatus, and I did it repeatedly, you know, in every election I was in. When I got to the Capitol after being elected lieutenant governor, which they never thought would happen, I ran against his own protege. They were so excited about that, they nailed my door shut at the state capitol to the office of lieutenant governor. It remained nailed shut for my first 59 days as the elected lieutenant governor of the state. And when people say, well, how do they get away with it? My response is, who stops them? If
Yes.
you're a one-party state and you have the power that the Clinton machine had, nobody stops them. So I learned how, number one, how to fight to win, which you fight differently if you're outnumbered than you do if you have the majority.
Yeah.
So I learned how to fight like the insurgent. Second thing, when I became governor, which was, by the way, the result of a Democratic governor who was in office being convicted of Whitewater-related felonies and having to be removed from office, I stepped into what was the most lopsided political atmosphere and legislature in America. Most people think it would be Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, Maine, Oregon, California. It was Arkansas. Arkansas was far more lopsided than Massachusetts.
Wow.
the
Hard to
neighbor the
imagine.
south.
That is very
You would
hard to
never have thought
imagine.
that. Let me give you the numbers. 89 to 11 in the House, Democrat to Republican. 31 to 4 in the Senate,
Oh,
Democrat to Republican. I was the only statewide Republican. I was 1 out of 7. All other all other offices were held by Democrats. The entire congressional delegation, except for one congressman from the northwest corner of the state, all of the rest of them, both senators, all Democrat, and 94% of all locally elected officials at the county and city level, all Democrats. That was my environment. When people say, we need a person who will fight, I'm thinking, well, I've heard of people who made speeches about fighting. They haven't got the scars on their back that I've got. Because from having my door nailed shut to having everything opposed, purely on partisan grounds, yet I never got less than 90% of my legislative package passed. Because I'll tell you, the blessing that was never intended to be was when you're in that kind of atmosphere, you learn how to govern. You learn how to govern. You don't have it easy. You don't go to your Republican legislature and lay out your agenda knowing they're probably going to pass it. You go into a hostile, hate-filled atmosphere knowing that they're going to hate you even if they like what you want to do.
right.
You learn how to govern. You learn how to build relationships one by one. break down the walls, break down the barriers, get people to work with you. By the time of my re-election as governor, I ended up serving 10 and a half years, so I have a pretty long stretch there. I had 49% of the African American vote in my state. Now, I've challenged, if you can find any Republican in America, white or black, who ever got 49% of the minority vote, African American vote, tell me who they are, because nobody's ever been able to say they none of that. So I'm convinced that we have left a lot of votes on the table as Republicans that we should have been getting. I'll give you a real brief description. I know you've asked for a quick answer, but I'm not giving you one. That's what happens
That's
when
okay.
you hold office and run. But it goes to the heart of how I believe that not just Republicans can win, but we can win at the general election level. Most of us, and all of us in this room, are political practitioners. We are involved in the details of the process. We tend to be horizontal. We look at things as liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, left and right. We see things horizontally. Sometimes we make our decisions of who to vote for based on who's the most conservative, and Democrats, who's the most liberal. And so we judge everything on the horizontal spectrum. When we get down to really going after the people that decide the election, those folks who aren't hardcore Republicans or Democrats, they're people in the middle that could lean right, could lean left, the ones that determine the outcome, that 15–20%. We've got to think like they think. They don't think horizontally. They think vertically. What they want to know is not, are you going to go left, you're going to go right. They want to know, are you going to go up, you're going to go down. Will things get better or will they get worse? So if you say to them, we want you to have power to make choices about your children's education. You know what? That resonates with a single black female mom who is doing the best she can with her kids, and she knows the government has assigned her kids to a failing school, and right now she's got no choice. You give her a choice, and she suddenly says, maybe I like you. People get elected to things like mayor, not because they're horizontally to the left or right, but because they say, I'll fix the potholes, the parks will be free of drug paraphernalia, and the streets will be safe,
Right.
and your trash will be picked up on time. People say, that's the kind of mayor I want.
Right.
It's not, can you go in there and poke the eyes out of the other side and have the big fight? I hear this all the time. I say, don't tell me what you can fight, tell me what you can fix.
Right.
Tell me what you can do. How can you govern? How do you move things to a way in which we can honestly say this country is safer as a nation, and we are not as threatened by not just ISIS, but all of Islamic jihadism, and by the Chinese and the Russian threats? And how are we better off economically? How is it that that person who is lifting heavy things all day long and sweating through their clothes at work, how will they be able to ever earn enough income to build an extra room on the house for their third kid?
Right.
How will they ever be able to put enough money aside so their kid can go to college without a huge debt? We start talking like that, we win people we don't normally win. And we've missed the boat as Republicans because we're out there fighting, oh, he's more conservative. He makes a harder speech. He really goes at, oh, great. Okay, have you ever governed anything? What have you actually done? What have you accomplished that moved the country or your state or whatever? That's what I want to know from somebody who's going to run.
And I tend to agree with that because up until 2008, I was a pure indie. I
Yeah.
did view things vertically.
Yeah.
So I get where you're coming from
Yeah.
for that.
And you know what? Deep down, you still do. I mean, you want to be on the right side of the horizontal ledger, but my guess is that if somebody tells you that they're real conservative, but you look in their record, they've never passed legislation, they've never worked with people, they've never won over anyone in the other side to anything, you're going to say, gee, I love your speech, but...
No, I always look at the record, believe me.
Yeah,
I
it's a little
encourage
intimate.
people to look at the record.
That's right,
So,
yeah.
No, I agree. Thank you so much, Governor. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you.
meeting you.
Great to
and
see you,
it was
too.
great to talk to you and get your thoughts on some of the important issues, especially in New Hampshire.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
Great to
time.
be with both of you. Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you, Michelle.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thanks.